and wherever you're picking up this broadcast from. I mention from time to time that people will come with requests. How about a sermon on this or a sermon on that? And again, this one is one of those. Somebody had asked me a week or more ago, and it said, like in John chapter 1, a scripture actually that Brother Jim Hester mentioned in his Bible class. They mentioned to me, they said, what about this passage in John 1 that the light came and the darkness did not comprehend it? Now, that's an interesting passage and caught my attention. I have been preaching for 54 years. I have never thought about preaching. I've preached about lessons that include light and talks about darkness, but I've never had a lesson just on that. And I said, fair enough, why don't you take that as an opportunity? And so I just entitled it, Turning from Darkness to Light. Now that idea comes from 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, how God called you me out of darkness and into his marvelous light. And so I liked a graphic that showed, well, the night had been there, but we're getting on to better things. And I thought about through the years, why did it appeal to you? And why doesn't it appeal to everybody? I just have appealed to me. It should appeal to everybody. My favorite color is blue. Why isn't everybody's favorite color blue? Well, and the reason is we come from different backgrounds. Sometimes we're more ready for something than somebody else. And I was so ready for something different than the crazy life that I had been living. And so as we look at this lesson of turning from darkness to light, I thought about what about the very beginning? It had that same kind of theme to it. Genesis 1 and verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and guess what? Darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. And so I like that kind of an analogy where a number of us came from, that we came out of darkness, but God said, I've got a plan for you. You don't even know I've got a plan for you, but I've got a plan for you, and I'm going to bring you out of darkness into marvelous light. Well, that was true not only in the creation of the earth, but think about in other areas. What does it mean to walk in darkness? And I thought about that, and usually you say, well, it means ignorance and sin. And you can find that out by going to a dictionary, particularly a Bible dictionary. But I thought I had never gone and looked at every passage in the Bible that talked about it, and then just took a handful out that meant the most. And in this graphic, you can hardly see anything. It's really dark. But just roughly in the middle, there looks like there's somebody walking along in the darkness. Well, that's the idea there. In Proverbs chapter 2, verse 13 and 14, those who walk in darkness delight in evil. And so as a teenager, I wasn't usually the one that thought up the wrong things to do, but somebody else thought them up, and I said, well, sounds good to me. And there's a certain internal pressure in the group that certainly you're not going to object to doing this or that is wrong. In John chapter 3 and verse 19, men loved darkness rather than light, for their deeds were evil. Why is it easier to do things wrong at night? Because it's harder for folks to find you. And so, oh yeah, that has a certain appeal to it. And if somebody has the mindset, I want to do the wrong things, they generally don't want to be found out in the doing of it. Again, in this morning's class, a reference was made to this idea of good and evil. In Isaiah 5 and verse 20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. So nowadays, if you want to do something good, hey, we should follow God's will. Oh, no, that's a terrible idea. Why, everybody has to make up their own idea, and morality, why, that's just puritanical ideas from centuries. We're so far beyond that. You don't have to be moral anymore. You don't have to discipline your kids. You don't have to dress reasonably. Any crazy thing is okay unless you're the person that says it's a crazy thing to do. Oh, well, look at that Ryan Laverne. Oh, he thinks that's crazy. It's just totally backwards. But here's the comforting thing about it. It's not new to our age. They were doing it 750 years before Christ. That's how evil works. Call the bad thing good, and then say everybody ought to think that way, and if you object, then they criticize you for the objecting. In Proverbs 4:19, the way of wicked is darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. Sometimes people say, I don't know why all these bad things happen to me. My car got wrecked. They arrested me, put me in jail and for 5 days for doing nothing. Well, didn't you fail the sobriety test? And you were twice the legal limit and exceeding the speed limit. That's why you hit the power pole. Yeah, but why does that happen to me? Well, it may be because you were drinking and driving. Maybe that's why it happened to you. And they just see that as incomprehensible because it happens over and over again. In Romans chapter 13, verse 12, English, Standard Version says, stop doing those things that belong to darkness. And some versions will have, say, no carousings. And so I spent some time on that. And that idea comes from this word. Other English Standard Version said orgies. Well, that sounds like it's just sex. It isn't. It's anything that's just totally out of control. The half-drunken, public, morally inappropriate, wild celebrations. I've never gone down to New Orleans Mardi Gras and certainly never been in the French Quarter or Bourbon Street. This is not a quiet party. Hi, would you like some tea? There's absolute pandemonium, everything wrong that you could think, and it's wonderful. And Paul said, don't do that. It doesn't mean don't have fun. I like parties. I love having fun. But I don't want to do crazy stuff. And he said, no drunkenness or immorality or indecency or quarreling or jealousy. Why? We've moved from darkness to light. We're under a whole new system. And our lives are completely changed. And so then I got to thinking about this idea of that men love darkness. And then it was last week I mentioned somebody sent this scammer kind of thing, like it's the government and they want me to, just give my name, last 4 digits of my social security number, grandmother's color of eyes, and the number of kids, and my driver's license. Outside of that, they weren't interested in anything much, except everything financially. And then I got to thinking about it. Doesn't that bother them? I mean, how do they sleep at night? So I began thinking about, do scammers feel pain and regret over the disaster they cause everybody else? And you're like, Sister Kay is saying no, and you're exactly right. They do not feel that. They really don't, because for a particular reason. Of the stories they tell themselves, the lies that they're buying into that says, oh no, it's fine to do. Well, what kind of thing could they possibly tell themselves that would get themselves there? They minimize sin. Oh, those wealthy Westerners won't miss the money. Well, it's not the multi-billionaires that they hit. It's seniors, middle class. Plunge them into utter devastation. They've wiped out their life savings. Or they blame the victim. If they fall for it, they deserve it. Only stupid people fall for scams. That's absolutely not true. Well, they should know better. How are they going to know better? You disguise it in such a way, you talk in such a way to try to lie to people to steal everything they have. Or emotional distance. They're just numbers on my screen. And so their sympathy, their empathy shuts off. Why? They can't see the end result, the victim's pain and financial collapse. That's how in military drone operators do. How can they do the operation? Well, I just blew up that compound. Okay, what's the next thing? It's just a screen. So then I tried to make it personal. Yeah, how'd you feel when you ate the turkey? Well, that's fine. What about your hamburger? That's fine. Did you think about the cow? Well, not until later. So the reality is, on the big scale, that's how people work in ruining others, or financial pressure. I have my family to feed, and it's the only way to make money. Picture a third world, highly depressed country. Social justification. Everybody's doing it. It's just a job. There can be what they call boiler rooms, big office areas, warehouse with hundreds of people on phones and computers, all doing it at the same time. Where everybody that you know is doing it, it sounds reasonable, and guilt just melts away. Hebrews chapter 3 and down verse 13, the second half of it, talked about being hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. I did lots of blue-collar jobs in early years, structural steel, framing, automotive. One of the interesting things is I logged. And in logging and framing, I'm right-handed. You're holding a hammer, holding a chainsaw, whatever it is. My fingers were square. They callous. And well, that happens because of that constant use and reuse. And people deal that way with sin. If you just tolerate it, oh, it's not a big deal. Why? I hardly notice it anymore. Absolutely. I think about that. I generally don't go barefooted. I certainly don't do that outside. We've just got the supposed aggregate driveway, and I'm walking across it barefooted. Other people, they're used to outside, and man, stones, rocks, just roll with it. But think about, finally, organized crime, especially in places like Nigeria, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, large compounds in Cambodia and Myanmar. Millions are stolen every week. Does it bother them? No, I'm just doing a job. Wow. So when you think about those who stay in darkness because their works were evil, they want to stay hidden from public and particularly governmental view. Well, there's the influence of darkness. In Luke 22:53, Jesus said, while I was with you daily in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. So here on that final night, there just across from Jerusalem, there's this little ravine, the Kidron Valley and the Mount of Olives, which is just a higher hill, just across the way. And here is the individuals that came to arrest him. Jesus said, you've got to arrest me at midnight in darkness. I wonder why that is. But this hour and the power of darkness are yours. This is what you use to get your evil deeds done. That night arrest by the chief priests and the temple guards represented the secrecy, the fear, and the depth of the evil in which they operate. They could have done it any time during the day. He was right there in the temple. Get him. No, we're going to snatch him at night. But that's how they operate. That's how evil works. But then, what about coming, so I went through, here's from darkness to light. How big a change is that in our life? It's massive. Those of you who are raised in Christian homes, and mom and dad are Christian, grandma and grandpa and everything, you don't see that massive of a step. Those of us that didn't come from that way, it is monumental. And so what about living in the light? It's a total changed life. I like this graphic. Whether there's daisy hairs or sunflowers or whatever it is, this is a little girl, and she's just kind of twirling in the middle of the path that I like. But in this path, if you look beyond her, You can see the hill immediately below. The path continues down to the valley. Beyond the pines, there's a deeper valley still. Beyond the valley, there's a mountain range. You get to see everything, and it's beautiful. In Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 8, Paul says to the Ephesians, "You who were once in darkness are now children of light." Yes, it's good to be here. Now, I want to pause and say, next week, Brother Tom Burrell is going to be speaking, and he's going to take another facet of this. It's going to be the narrow road. And so our lessons kind of work together well, hand in hand. This one just says, it's daylight, and isn't that joyous? Down in Ephesians 5 and verse 9, "For the fruit of light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth." And at that point I thought, how's that work for you? Doing good, living right, and telling the truth. Man, you get in so much less trouble. Things go so much easier. I hadn't crashed my car into a telephone pole, fallen down a manhole cover, been chased by police, been handcuffed, all those kind of things that could be part of our lives weren't. Why? Because of Jesus Christ. And he says, that's what it's like when you live in the light. In Colossians 1 and verse 12, how he's qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. What's it like? Living a life like Enoch. You go, that's what he lived in a dark world. If he can, we can too. And Colossians 1 and verse 13, he delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred or translated us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. So if you've watched Star Trek and Star Wars, that kind of thing, you like that teleporter kind of thing? You get in there and you just get zoomed out to someplace else. Man, I don't like being caught in traffic. I just like to be that next place and let's go do it. God said, that's my plan, taking you out of that kingdom of darkness and into the kingdom of his dear Son. So it's a changed life. And Jesus was the cause of that, because he's the light of the world. I was started to take a world with him and brightness there, but I'd like you to look at the context here. In John chapter 8 and verse 12, Jesus said, "I am the light of the world, and he who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life." Now, I mention this because the context from chapter 7 and chapter 8 seems to be one of these Jewish festivals called the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles. It was the most joyous festival they had all year. You find that, if you want to verify that, in John chapter 7 and verse 2, verse 14, verse 37, and here in chapter 8 and in verse 12. You have the temple proper of the holy and most holy place, and then surrounding that you had courtyards. The court of the priests, the court of Israel, the court of women, and beyond that, the court of the Gentiles. Now what we find is that Josephus will talk about how they had these massive pillars that were oil-fired that created light in the courtyard. Probably an overstatement. But the early sources said it lit up all Jerusalem. Well, that's maybe a little bit beyond what that capability would be. But that was brought lightness into the temple courtyards. And we find in this scene when Jesus said, "I'm the light of the world," John 8 and verse 20 identifies that he was in the court of the women that everybody had to pass through if you're going to go into the court of men or Israel and then into the court of priests. Jesus is in that courtyard when those lights are there. And he said, "I am the light of the world. Now, what's the sense of that in Psalm 119 and 105? The psalmist said, "Thy word is a lamp to my feet." I generally get up way earlier than Glenda. I'm awake 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Guess what? I get out my phone, try not to fall over stuff if I'm headed here or there. And so, why? Because I need some light to move around. So poor old Paul, he tumbled down the stairs. Well, he's out of commission for a while. So we need that light to know where to go. And Psalm said, "Thy word is the one that tells me that." Matthew 4, 15 and 16. "How Galilee shall see a great light." Isaiah 49, and verses 1 through 6. He said, "I'll make my servant, I'll make you a light to the nation." So that light of God's word was going to be given not only just to Israel, but to us Gentiles, the rest of the world as well. And so think about this, that we live a changed life because of Jesus. Because Jesus came to reveal God's way of life to the whole world, not just to a small little group of Judeans in the first century. But then, as I've referenced, if it's available, why doesn't the world accept it? In 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 4, "The God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers." Satan doesn't want the masses to follow him. I thought about, how does that work? Well, in John 1:15, "The light shines in darkness," and here's the verse that was asked of me, "and the darkness did not comprehend it." There's most people say, "Oh man, I know all about Jesus and that's what I want to do, and I know all about the Bible and I'm on track." No, I don't think that's where I am. In John 1:11, "And he came to his own people, and those who were his own people, his own nationality, his own tribe, did not receive him." Wow. You'd think if somebody was, it would be your own people. No, the Jews rejected him. John 1:12, "But as many received him, he gave the right to become the children of God." By doing what? "Even to those who believe on his name." The notice that I want to make here, most denominational religions say, you just believe in Shazam, you're a Christian. The problem, number one, is John 1:12 does not say that. Belief was part of, it was the first step of, it gave them the right to become. It didn't make them instantaneously a Christian just by saying, "I believe." So why do people reject the light? Well, there's a number of reasons. Sometimes there's a hard heart. They're in sin, they like what they're doing, or they don't know how to get out of it, and they're used to it. In criminal areas, you may or may not know, we have a child's prison in Washington. When you go out I-90 headed towards Spokane in New York, and it intersects Highway 18, which is just beyond Federal Way, Auburn, before you get to Snoqualmie. Tucked up on the northwest corner of that is a lovely little sounding piece of property, Echo Glen. This is for 13-year-old murderers, 12-year-old addicts, 15-year-old prostitutes. It's just, you don't want to put them in with the adult population. The reason I mention that, as tragic as it is, it didn't start with them. Grandma and Grandpa are still in prison. Uncle Henry just got out. And so it's a generational thing. They've never had a normal life. They've never had a Thanksgiving meal. Why? It didn't exist in the chaos in which they grew up. That's all they knew. Or for some people, it's a cultural bias. Look, we're often Uzbekistan, and us Uzbekis, the only thing we've ever done is this. Or the social cost. Boy, if I make a change, my whole family will have nothing to do with me. Or I just love to sin, I like what I'm doing. Or religious deception. Now that Pastor Jones thinks it's all right. or prejudice or apathy, or, boy, if I do that, I'd lose my job. There's all kinds of reasons why people don't change. Not just one, but Satan is behind it all. But darkness rejects the light. They're just not on the same path, if you will. So you think about a believer's mission in the light. In Matthew 5:14, you are the light of the world. Jesus said of you what he said of himself. You give others the opportunity to see there's a different way. You can do whatever you want, but you don't have to do, and what for me was a turning point. And I say repeatedly, they didn't use these words, but the message was, there are better decisions. I didn't know there were better decisions. I didn't know anybody that knew anybody that had made better decisions. They all made crummy decisions. And one person pointed me toward Jesus Christ. He said, you're a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Let your light shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father. They said, look, it's all because of God, not because of me. And Acts 26:18, how Christ came to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God, to receive the forgiveness of sins. Because that's what you're trying to do for people. It's not like you get, some extra credits, but they get eternal life. Whether they want it or not, that's up to them. You get to be the person to give them the option. In Ephesians 5:11, he said, have nothing to do, and the end of that verse said, the unfruitful deeds of darkness. You look back on the dark times and you say, at the time as whoopee-doo, you look back on it and say, I wish I had never done that. I wish somehow I could just erase that and it had never been. Go back and go into the timeline and reverse history. But that's nice in science fiction, but that doesn't seem to work in the real world. God is the one that takes sin away. And so in 1 John 2 and verse 10, whoever loves his brother, look at this, lives in the light. And there's nothing in him to make him stumble. In this, we've just kind of covered the Christian life. That Jesus is the author, the preparer of that for us. And like he's the light of the world, he lights our fires and says, share that with somebody else. Don't go back into those dark and worldly ways. And then when you do, when you love your brother, you've got not only a changed life, you are living that way. It is continuous. That is the new reality for you. And when you live that way, it's not like, boy, but if I could just get out there, start stealing cars or holding up 7-Elevens, man, that would be fun. Oh, no, man, that's just tragic. Because think about this. When you have real love for God and real love for everybody else, there's nothing in the darkness to say, man, wouldn't that be fun? You say, that was so tragic. And I think about that repeat. I'm so sorry I did what I did. I'm so grateful to God that he would take me. The Apostle Paul looked at himself as the chief of sinners. He said, you want to take yeah, but I'd like to, but I don't think I can. Paul said, look, you line everybody that's bad up. I'm at the head of that line. And so if we look at ourselves, I'm just not worth it, God. God said, yes, you are. And you're worth a whole lot more to me because now you're my child and you have a changed life. And so think about that in appreciating God and sharing this message with others. That's your mission. We're going to be singing this song, I Want to Be a Worker for the Lord. Because the Christian life is not a vegetable that sits in a flower pot that, here I am, if somebody wants something, get somebody else. I'm here just to look pretty. That think of yourself, what can I do to encourage others, to bless others, to bring them to the Lord? This is an invitation song. If you'd like prayers, if you would like to be baptized, if you haven't been, and you know what God would have you to do. Let's be standing and singing this song. Brother Ben, number 297, I Want to Be a Worker.
Sorry, folks. Gizmo is not working well for me.